lectures, and I think he's got more than enough in his directory there to keep doing that. For those of you who don't know by this point, because he's now had a chance to meet with a number of people here and give some talks already, Bill is one of the leading interaction design researchers in the world. He's worked at Xerox PARC. He's a professor at the University of Toronto. He was a chief scientist at Alias Wavefront, SGI. He's one of the pioneers of computer music. He's a member of the ACM Chi Academy. He's just got lots of experience. He's worked in Hollywood, with Hollywood designers. He's worked in the graphics industry, and has a lot of interesting things to say about software design today. And I'll just pass it on to Bill. Next slide.
And so today I'm going to talk a little bit like the other day. I'm not going to talk about specific research that I've done. In some sense, I've published that. It's on my website. There's tons of videos and papers there if you want to dig through that. And it seems to me that if you're going to come in person, you might as well talk about stuff that tries to bring together whatever you learned from doing that, and more importantly, what you think about it in terms of going forward. It's, for me, also a bit of a catharsis to sort of saying not only what has gone right with my career, but what's gone wrong with it, and what did I learn from it. And of course, of the things that go wrong from it, you either walk away bruised and feeling like hell and licking your wounds, or you just sort of say, wow, that was a really expensive degree. I better use it, right, because I paid for it. And so I want to talk about design and software product development. And I want to start with a few things, and this is for you, Susie, because this is in the mountains of Austria, and this is Bossy, the cow. And I don't know how you say Bossy in German. I speak German, but Bossy is not in my vocabulary. But there is a rule, and the Bossy rule that reflects to software products is that you can't milk that cow forever. And it's by that authority on software engineering, Farmer Brown. And it basically says that no matter how good your product is, at a certain point, it is going to have, you can't build your company and your future growth on a single product. And this is all by way of saying that no matter how successful your products you have right now are, you need new products. Now the thing is that most of us, and our revenues come from N+1 products. So you do it, and I'll do version 1.0, we'll do 1.0, 2.0, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 4.75, and so on. And there's a few things economical about this. And understand, neither am I an economist, nor has anybody hardly ever seen me use a formula in a presentation before. But the one economic reality about N+1 products is that for every new release of a product, you have to have a delta improvement for release N, such that delta I sub n is greater than VT, where VT is the value threshold, above which you must add value such that it'll motivate people to buy the upgrade. So if delta I sub n isn't greater than VT, you just spent a bunch of money on engineering that you're not going to recoup because your business model is going to fall apart. So just a little factoid, which is in some sense obvious. What is a little bit less obvious, especially as n increases, is that the cost of delta I sub n grows proportionally with order n. It's not a linear function. It's not a constant. That if you think about it in terms of legacy code that's there that makes it harder to add the same amount of value, the fact that low-hanging fruit has all been plucked off earlier versions as you go further down makes it harder. And the fact that as the number of features in the product increases, the power of any one feature is a smaller proportion of the whole thing. So all other things being equal, it just costs you way more to get delta I above VT late products, say around version 10, than in version 2. Version 2 is simple. It's a no-brainer. In fact, it's essential because otherwise the product, because of course 1.0 didn't work. But the other part that's important about this set of things about N+1 products is that the size of the addressable market tends to decrease with N. because of what's known as the good enough syndrome, or the good enough phenomenon. That at a certain point, for the number of people who care about that new feature gets smaller and smaller, and those features become more and more specialized. And I think there are exceptions to these rules, I call the rules, but it says beware of companies that base their entire business on just selling new versions of the same basic product, the N+1 model. It's not saying don't make new versions, it's just saying you also should have new products. Now the observation about this in terms of the software industry is that most companies actually have a terrible track record at developing new products other than their first one. When n equals 1, companies that exist have a great history of making n+1 products where n minus 1 equals 0. But for other cases, if you look at the industry, it's not good. So most new product releases are n+1. And the issue here is that when non-n+1, when new products as opposed to n+1 products come out of a company, more often than not, they come out of a skunk works. They come out of illegal, bad behavior that happens to turn out right. And the question is, do you want to bet your pension plan on that? And do you want to bet your investment dollars on a company that has no formal process for doing new things? It just happens by accident of bad behavior gone good. And I'd say, I'm not sure I think that's a good idea. Skunk works are fine, but I don't want to bet my future on it. And just as I said from the previous models, I think the long-term viability of companies says you need new products. And what we see, if you actually look at the industry, is that new products generally come through mergers and acquisitions rather than in-house development. Although I have to say, while I'm here, I would love to find out who made Movie Maker, because it's my favorite product. And the only thing I'd like to do is kick Microsoft's butt for letting Apple outmarket you, because that is such a better product than iMovie. And in some sense, just having said that, the reason I'm giving this talk is if it had a benefit, if I have an impact, here's how we'd like to be rewarded within about 2 years, is when a product comes out where people say, my God, when's Apple going to come out with such a great design? Right? That's the bar. Now, I want to talk about, let's say, a more or less neutral company, just as a case study. And the nice thing here is there's a sort of a vanity book that Adobe commissioned from a woman named Pfeiffer. And because Adobe paid for it, they cooperated, so the data is pretty good. But it's actually very self-critical in some sense. So this is actually a book has a fair bit of integrity. And if you understand a bit about the dynamics of software companies, if you accept that Adobe is somewhat typical, but atypical in the sense it's successful and still independent, let's look at their track record. And the observation here is, in the entire history of Adobe, not including your embedded products that they started off with, the PostScript things that were embedded in laser printers, they've done precisely 2 products in their history in-house. The first one is Illustrator, but that we already said, when n+1, when n minus 1 equals 0, that you expect that. So that's Illustrator. The only other product that they've done in-house is Acrobat, and that was done in 1993. And I do not believe that John Warnock understood what was going to happen with PDF files and the internet coupled with browsers when he brought that out. I believe that that product's financial performance in the first 3 years was such a disaster that any sane company would have killed the product if it hadn't been brought out by the president and founder of the company. And by the way, even the acquisitions like Photoshop, there was a product group at Adobe. That was the second desktop application they brought out. And the fact is that the product group said, this is not within our core competence. We're a PostScript company. This doesn't use PostScript. Why would we have anything to do with this? That product would never have come out internally. And there was, in the product group, complete objection to that product being released or being acquired. 2 brothers did it, one of whom worked at ILM. And it was, again, Warnock's intervention and Warnock's intervention alone that caused Adobe to acquire that product. And by the way, it was 5 years before they actually bought the product. It was owned by these 2 brothers until that point. And it took almost a year. It was, I think it was the 3rd or 4th quarter they started to break even, and then it took off. And within 3 years, it just eclipsed everything else they were doing in their business. And it would never have happened if it wasn't for one person's, powerful person's thing. Sound familiar? So the fact is, these things are, in some cases, to 2 or 3 levels of acquisition. Macromedia, if you did a similar study, you'd find that they had a little bit better track record, but one of their best successes of an in-house developed product, of course, was After Effects, Final Cut Pro, which they couldn't sell. They couldn't figure that out, and Apple took over. Again, acquisitions and mergers. And the point I want to make is that there are lots of companies that have a great track record in developing new products and bringing them to market. The only thing is, they're not software companies. And yet these companies can bring out products on time, on budget, that are high quality and do extremely well. And my theme is that we can learn from these companies and feed what we learn from them back into the software industry and start to make sense. And I believe there's good reasons for why we're in the situation right now. I can explain it if you want. Dan Olson from Brigham Young is the one who gave me the best explanation. That in the gold rush, there were no rules. There were no laws. You just ran, you went for the gold, you kept going, and somehow you managed to survive. And this is the strongest. And eventually, as the gold started to run down, you got roads built, laws, and sort of stuff, and started to be civilized, and then you started to be a little bit more refined in how you conducted your business and how things went. Because there wasn't just so much to be made that you didn't have to worry about it, because you could still cover these inefficiencies through the huge profits that were coming. And the problem with the software industry is the gold rush didn't stop for a long time. So you were always in this frontier mentality. Well, the frontier's over. Can't do that anymore. Those days are done, at least in the foreseeable future. And in this whole thing, my theme is that we can learn from the companies, we can copy them, and this has to do with process. Lester Thurlow, who's the dean of the Sloan School of Management at MIT, wrote a book called Head to Head that compared the investments in research in post-war Japan versus post-war USA. And one of the things in that book he talked about was that the return on investment for investment in process was on the order of tenfold that you got from product, from technology. And in some sense, I think it's really important in terms of design, in terms of research, to spend as much time thinking about process, maybe 10 times as much if you want to equal. Whether the number's right or not, I just want to say research and process is just as important product. And so this is a lot about process. And so the thesis I have is that the fundamental part of the process that's missing in the software industry is design, and design in the sense that anybody who went to industrial design school or went to architecture school would understand the meaning of the term, as opposed to if you're, say, an electrical engineer and how you use the term design. I'm not saying they're not unrelated. I just want to be a little bit more specific. And so let's just take a look at it. So here's the status quo. And I know that I'm generalizing from a fewer number of companies than perhaps I should, so I'll be clear. But the general process, as I see it in the software industry today from the people I've interviewed, as well as the company that I was an executive of for almost 9 years, is that somebody decides we have to do a product, and a team is assigned to it, and you start building it. It is, from the moment you start, let's do this, it's greenlit, resources are there, you start building it, and then you ship it. Here's the scary part, in my experience. At the time that you assign the team and start building it, of course you don't know what it's going to build, how much it's going to cost, whether it can be built in some cases, and so on. But when you do this, you also assign a number to it in the forecast for when you believe it's going to ship. And the sales team and the whole business model and financial projections are based on that revenue source of a product you don't even know if you can build it, much less how much it's going to cost and when it can be finished. And my sense is we can look at other industries to find out an alternative approach to that, which scares the hell out of me. I can take off my shirt and show you the bruises, but I'll spare you that horrible sight. And the two industries I want to talk about happen to be the two industries that I know the most about outside of technology, because they were my customers. And they were the film industry and the industrial design, in particular industrial design in the automotive industry. And here's what I want to say a bit about this. These images are just, these are a couple pages from the script of the film The Graduate. Here's Dustin Hoffman in the swimming pool and so on and so forth. But the point I want to make about this is that if you want to make a film, here's the deal. Here's what you have to do. You have to get a package. So the question is, what's the package in a feature film? Well, the package, first of all, here's the creative part of the package. The creative part, you need a director, you need a script. What story are you going to tell? Who's going to be the lead storyteller? You need to have the stars, the key stars, signed up, committed that if this film gets funded by such and such a time, they are contractually obliged to act in it. You need the stars, you need the script, and you need the director. Then you need the engineering part of the thing laid out. You need your engineering plan. The engineering plan for feature film is who's the director of photography, how are you going to shoot it, where are you going to shoot it, what are you going to shoot it with, what's the crew, what blue screen, what effects, all that sort of stuff. So not only what are we going to make, how are we going to make it, and how much is that going to cost? And the third thing you need is you need the business plan. And that says, what's the title? What's the tagline? What's the line that sort of goes out, you know, to I'll be back or whatever that's going to do this? What's the whole advertising campaign, the graphics? How are you going to execute on that? What's the budget? And most importantly, exactly, before you start, exactly what day is it going to open, on what screens and what cities, and what's the whole campaign? And who's going to go on tour to support it on what TV shows? The entire business, manufacturing, and culture thing must be in place. And then you go to the producers for the green light. And then you decide where you go. And every penny spent to that point is completely on spec by the producers. And if it does not get greenlit, they are out of pocket. It's the angel investing part of the thing as opposed to the venture capital, if you want to use that analogy. And that's how the film industry works. And the only time that's accepted, or there's exceptions, is when you have somebody like Francis Ford Coppola at the height of his power, or Warren Beatty with Ishtar, where somebody has so much clout they can break the rules. And like so many companies too, you can break the rules and sometimes you get away with it and you hit a home run and you're filthy rich, George Lucas, or Ishtar. And again, it's not something you want to bet your retirement plan on. Now the other side is, let's look at the automotive industry. So in the automotive industry, I spent a lot of time. Anybody here who has a car that is more than or less than 5 or 7 years old, it's almost guaranteed it was designed with software that came out of our company. Every car company in the world uses Alias to design the styling part of the car. If you have a BMW, I probably know the designer of your car. If you have a Hyundai, I probably know the designer of your car, and so on. Now, the deal is this, is that when you go, you start off sketching cars and so on like here, but before the green light process, there is a full-size car that despite 8.5 years of being submerged in that industry, I still have to ask, is that real or is that a model? Because they can make clay models which are indistinguishable from the real thing. You would swear you could step in. If you've ever been to a car show and seen concept cars, you know you've seen it. But in fact, the fact is you probably or may have seen it, you just didn't know because it looked real. It's indistinguishable. The point is, those things cost around $300,000 to make. They take about 3 months to make of a team of about 12 people. And the car is perfect. And it is not until you've got to that resolution of knowing what you're going to build that the green light process takes place and you decide, will we build it or not? And if you decide to build it, there is still at least 1 year of engineering before you can start to manufacture, despite that level. Now contrast that with what we do in the software industry. And so I understand there's a difference in maturity between software and the automotive. In some sense, I've alluded to it already with this notion of the frontier. But I stand by my guns on this one. And so my simple premise is, let's just follow the example of what they do and examine what the consequences would be if we did what the film industry did or the automotive. Yeah?
Sorry, I don't know if you want to take interruptions.
I can try. You can try, and I'll just...
I just wanted to question one part of your comparison, which is that film and cars obviously have a really high manufacturing overhead per product, whereas we seemingly have none other than copying to a CD.
Yeah.
So does that affect, I mean, is it still an apt comparison given?
Things like the costs of goods and manufacturing. So first of all, with automobiles and so on, the cost of manufacturing is much higher. I would argue that whereas the shooting the film is far more like writing the code, and then I'd say stamping a DVD is no more expensive than a CD-ROM. So but the cost of goods and these other factors in manufacturing affect how you do these. So again, like every analogy, at a certain point, they break down. So take these as far as we can, be a little bit generous, and then if being generous still leads to just totally questionable conclusions, then come back and get me as even harder than you just did. But my sense is that what we really want to do is something like this. It's a scientific visualization. Well, before we greenlight the project, let's have some design. And design's like a funnel. And I'll tell you why it's like a funnel. And then you greenlight. And this says, as a company, I want to know exactly what criteria I'm going to be measured by. I want that greenlight process to be formal, explicit, and I want that greenlight process to reflect the strategic plan of the company so I know exactly what I'm shooting for when I start to do it. And if I meet those criteria, we're going to go here. But that's what I'm converging on. And yeah.
I really like this analogy, and I'm a big fan of prototyping. There might be there's like one difference that strikes me, which is if you make a movie, you can have 20 movies that are all kind of in the same genre, and you get a pretty good handle of how this sells, and you can probably predict somehow, if this is going to fly or not. If you make software, it's often you're going into a market where nobody is right now, right? Ideally, you come up with some really cool new software like, whatever, help people at home make movies like on the fly or something. And I mean, this is inherently more difficult to come up with an estimate if this is going to fly. The number of unknown variables is kind of a first off kind of.
So the thing is, even with its maturity, the movie industry still does what we would now call usability testing, where they do preview screenings and uncut, and they'll keep refining the thing till they get it right. So there's a certain amount of iterative design going into filmmaking now, more than usual. And some people would say that's killed and watered down the film industry too, by the way. I'm not saying it's a good thing. In some cases, I don't think it's a good thing in software either. But not always. This is exceptions. We have to be flexible as opposed to dogmatic. And you heard me say you don't have to be dogmatic, and that's the pot calling the kettle black, I might say. But well, let me keep going. I think we'll hit on some of those things, because already we see here is that there's a couple observations already that from this simple model that we can start to see that I think is going on here that I think are rather important. And you'll see that, first of all, in this, the color bar I've got underneath this particular slide is the circular arrows are just showing this has to be an iterative process. So the agile programmers here and the extreme programmers don't get too yelling at me, because I believe the whole notion of iteration and so on and so forth. Also, the user-centered part of thing, it's clear we have to have users and customers in that process and make sure that it's not the tail wagging the dog kind of thing. But I want to notice this color coding of orange to this part purple-ish color to say that I sometimes get people yelling at me because I make a very clear distinction between user interface design and usability testing and usability engineering. They're not the same thing. And if I want somebody who's really good at usability, they know statistics, for example. Most person who went to art college, I don't want them to know statistics. I want them to know how to draw. Different skill sets. And they belong at different places in the process. They're both essential, but neither is sufficient. And then the question is, how do you bring these people in at the right times? And so the whole thing here is how do we maximize the quantity and the quality of the new products? And I don't mean just in terms of the artistic side. Remember what I said about film. I mean on the engineering side and planning that, and I mean in terms of the business side. You must have innovation and the same quality in all aspects, and we'll come back to that as we go along. And this notion about the green light, how we make these decisions and who sets those is just really critical. And my sense is most people say, well, we can't afford the upfront time to do design. And the curious thing to me is in every software project that I've observed, we couldn't afford the upfront cost, but we could afford to be 2 years late, fully staffed, as opposed.
Or have astronomical support costs.
Or have yes, phenomenal support costs, or fix it in the documentation, and so on. And the clear thing here is that the cost of planning is going to be less than the cost of time due to you incur because of poor planning. And the other thing is, I hate investing disproportionately to the risk. I want to contain the risk for the amount I've got invested. So easy in, easy out. But as I go further down the process, when I've got a lot there, I want everything to be balanced here. And the point I want to make here also is product design is not the same thing as product engineering. And so you get what you reward. And so this is a little bit about this notion about risk, evaluation, investment, and so on. And during this design process, the red line here shows over time what you're investing, the costs involved with this, as you're going through this project. And you know, in terms of there's two labels on the y-axis, right? There's on the right hand, I've got investment, and the other side is criteria and weight. And the point I want to make here is that from a management perspective, as we're going through this design, it's critical to understand that at the beginning of the process, I have very little invested, so it's easy come, easy go. Easy in, easy out. It's very loose and very informal. As I move along, my investment increases, so my criteria as to whether I keep things in the funnel or not gets higher and higher as I've got more and more invested. I've got to be more and more rigorous. Even though I'm still in the design cycle, it is absolutely wrong to manage things here the same way I manage things there, which is I'm trying to capture that in this notion. At the beginning, we just pick and choose. Later on, we'll start to call, and towards the end, we start to evaluate. Now, of course, it's not quite true. It's a little bit recursive because at each stage, you're introducing new things that also go through the pick. But in a general sense, it's a funnel, and we get more and more rigorous as our investment and exposure is increased. And I also want to point out there's a serious discontinuity. The green light is not just yet another evaluation process along a thing. It is now we're making a commitment to go or no go, and the investment gets stepped up. And that, and then and only then, is when we staff the project for engineering, for business, and the rest. That's where the venture capital kicks in, and we're now a business. But we don't have a business until we get there, in my opinion. And of course, you need a dashboard up above where you can monitor this stuff, and then we get going. And the green light is really critical here because it really reflects what are your corporate values, what are your business objectives, what is the whole thing. And it has to be a weighted matrix in the sense, I mean, it doesn't have to be. One way to do it is that way. But in some sense, you just want to make sure this is explicit before you go into the process, if you're starting to say, because this is what I'm working to. And if I make it as a designer or don't, that's fine. But because I think there's a couple implicit contracts that are made at the point where we accept it when you go through the green light process. Basically, if something passes the green light, that says if I'm the head of design, then I did my job, I met the criteria, and it came through. And so I'm rewarded by doing that. I'm not expected to have a 100% hit record either. That would be, if I get that, you should fire me because I'm far too conservative. Second is, the VP of engineering for that product, or the person responsible for engineering for that product, when the product is greenlit, they're accepting an implicit contract that I can deliver this by this amount of time for this much money, and it will do that. And I'll be rewarded or penalized by my performance in doing that. And at the same time it's greenlit, the person in charge of sales and the revenue for that product is accepting the contract and saying, if you, VP of engineering, deliver this on this amount of time in that form, I will sign up for the following revenue numbers on this quarter, that quarter, and that quarter. And all bets are off if you don't. And I will not be held responsible for the consequences if you slip. And we'll talk about that. And if I am too worried to do that, then I will not greenlight the project. Everybody's career, everybody has a stake in making sure the integrity of the process and that, and they sign up for very clear, explicit contracts at that point. And you need the dashboard. This is like to know what's going on. Now, there's some really interesting trade-offs here in terms of how you design the process, and that is, for example, yeah?
This is what they do in the film industry?
No.
Sign up for a given amount of revenue, and they get fired when they don't make it?
No, I'm not saying, I'm switching to the softer.
This is the way it ought to be.
I'm trying to move into saying things. Now, there are film companies that do work that way, but the film industry has a different financial model, and it is that only one film in 10 is expected to make money. And that's the model. So as long as 1 in 10 does, they're okay. Which is why, by the way, Pixar is quite as golden, because they're batting 100%. And that's never happened in the history of film before. So the interesting thing, and by the way, think about design, what it can do for you. Just think Pixar. And getting it right. They're really careful. I know them really well. If you look at this project, one of the things that when you have that funnel, you've got finite resources to go into this front end of the part of the process. Now the tough call is, Do you do like one great big project, or you do a bunch of little ones, or sort of mixed? Do you have a mixed portfolio? And it's like any other investment strategy. You've got to think about: am I going to hedge my bets, or am I going to? Or is it an all or nothing proposition? And it's a really tough call to make in a number of things, because size does matter, and it does impact the overall risk, but it also impacts things like time to market. Obviously, you can get small things to market faster. So obviously, the number of projects, if you have fixed cost or amount to spend, then obviously the number of projects is related to the size of the projects that you have. And the risk, overall risk, can be distributed over a number of things, as opposed, it's much higher if you only have one project. And the time to market, obviously, is proportional to the size. And the relevance of any feature, obviously, has got to do with the size of the product itself. And so there's a number of functions here that we've got to think about. I want to talk a little bit about, because this is really important to understand when I talk about design from the perspective of what a designer thinks about design as opposed to design as an engineer thinks about design. And that is that most people think, well, you know, if you go to art school, I actually have a T-shirt that was given to me in an architecture school that has EWFA on the back. And if you ever see that, punch them out, because that says engineers work for architects. It was an architecture school. And they don't. They work with them. And the key thing here is, do not take anything I'm saying as an anti-engineer or a pro-designer thing. Both are absolutely essential to the process. My point is, neither is sufficient on its own. And the problem is, in the things now, is that there's far too few designers, and the design process is too little of a place. Now, design is like, yeah.
Sorry, so about your number thing. So anecdotally, we met with a guy who used to work at Apple, now works here. He says they had 8 designers work on OS 10 and iTunes and iMovie. That was it, 8. Obviously, that was enough. So numbers isn't the absolute measure.
There's this guy called Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
So we can talk a little bit about that, and I'm going to talk a bit about Apple as we go along, and there's some bad news and good news there. And
Whereas we have, how many, 300?
no, you. No, we'll take it as a proportion of the population, and numbers won't look quite as. Your numbers look good. I'm not. This isn't. The point here is just to notice that on the design side, people think design is the creative thing and engineering sort of like the grunge thing. Not at all. Engineers are the people who make things. Design is a negative process. It's not a positive creative process. And that's because you, in one sense, you generate a bunch of ideas, but then you have to throw most of them away. One of the main skills learned in design school, besides sketching, for example, is this discipline of the critique, where you sit there and you learn to take it from your instructor and your peers as to what's wrong without getting mad and actually saying, thank you for telling me what's wrong with my work. It's a really interesting thing. And you can see this because you're converging on a single product from a whole bunch of possibilities. So if you think of design as a funnel, it clearly is a negative thing overall, because you end up with this one thing, you start off with a gazillion things. It's negative. Engineering is just the opposite. So when a designer says, I'm making a prototype, even if they did it in C++, they prototype in order to be destructive, to tear it apart and find out what's wrong with it. Engineers build prototypes as an incremental, iterative way to build things. And when you're prototyping in the same languages and the same vocabulary and using the same English to describe it, you have cultural differences which are going to cause serious problems. And I built a product where we did that, even though everything worked, it was the fastest to market of any product the company had ever done. Actually, it was the only new product they'd ever done that actually got to market that worked. The engineers thought my team had failed and were just a bunch of useless bums who couldn't program despite their fancy PhDs, because not a line of the code could be used from a prototype, which I called a living specification as opposed to a prototype. Not a line of that code could be used in the product. So they thought we were just incompetent, because they didn't understand that our job was to take things apart and to give them the specification, not to build the code, because it was just this complete cultural difference. So as we go through here, this is a bit of just an allocation about the roles to sort of say there is this mutual dependence, but there's a change in balance through this. And so from my perspective, at least in the sizes of projects that I've managed, that if we look at the beginning of the funnel, design dominates a lot of it, but there's engineering in here right from the very beginning, because how are we going to build this thing? Can it be built? Is the science done? But also there's a sales and marketing up here. But it's mostly design. Here it's mostly engineering. I've probably got too much business here in the blue. If anyone wants to help me with the proportions from your perspective, I would welcome that. And as we get towards the end here, we start to get the sales folks coming in to work with the marketing. Design's still here to look and evaluate for the next version of the M+1. And down here, engineering is here for support and doing the next version and so on. But the point I'm making is everybody is in design. Everybody is involved in all phases pretty much. It's just a question of proportion. My comment here, and the key of this slide, is the person who dominates in the population should be managing that part of the pipeline. The head of the manager of the design process should be a design manager and not an engineer. It is as absurd, in my opinion, to have a software engineer managing design as it is to have somebody from RISD or Art Center deciding on the engineering phase what your data structures are and managing the software engineering process. You would never accept that. It's absurd. And so is it on the other side. These are culturally different people that require culturally different types of management, and the question is when do you make the transitions and how do you manage it? And while you're showing mutual respect for each person's expertise and skill. And contrary to Don Norman, among others, in his most recent book, which proves he didn't understand anything about design until recently, it's a tantamount to sort of saying, I just discovered that emotion's important to design. I'm saying, duh. But he has this comment, there's an epilogue in this book called Emotional Design, sort of saying everybody's a designer. And of course, we're not. He says everybody's, I'll come. He says everybody's a designer because we choose the color of our walls and arrange our furniture. Well, right. But if everybody's a designer because they do that, then guess what? We're all mathematicians because we can't change when we leave the grocery store. And at that point, if you're going to trivialize it, then everybody's a designer. And so I'm a software engineer too because I can use a calculator. Now, trust me, you don't want me doing the concurrency in your operating system. And the point here is that we have to respect these skills and put these people in and really let them do it. And not be in situations where where the head of HR has the same vote on user interface issues as the head of design. All right? And so we just have to do this. And there's some science here from Gould. There's an interesting book that sort of talks about this from a cognitive science perspective. This talks about different cognitive processes and problem solving of these different communities and so on. They are culturally distinct. You had a question?
Yes. I heard the phrase, it's time to choose an engineer and start shipping product. Are you saying there's a green light where it's time to choose a designer and start building product?
I think there's just as the engineers are they're saying, here's your mandate, and now here's what you're going to deliver, and here's your budget. I think the designers not only can work within those types of constraints. Here's your budget, here's what you've got to deliver, and here's how much time. Do you accept the contract? But once you say yes, then you have to work to those. Stravinsky, one of the great composers of the world, said the more constraints you give me when you give me a commission, the more creativity I have because I know exactly what the boundaries are so I can go. And most designers are happy to work. That's what they thrive on. They don't want to, it's this delusion that they just want to sit around and be dreamers. No, they're as hardworking. They just work differently and do different things. But absolutely, I think there's no question. And that there's this notion of culture and how we manage these things to really make them work is really critical. And I've touched on this stuff about the responsibilities of who does what, when, and that, so we'll just keep going. And the clear things that are hard is that nothing's as clean as I'm describing. And there's some serious human resource issues that happen here because sometimes, it's really clear, there's some great ideas that come out of somebody in engineering. That they have a technology that we can build a product around. Well, that person may well be the key person in a shipping product, and yet they're the ones who has the creativity to try and bring this whole new business part. And how do you sort of backfill there? Now, there's another part that sort of says if anybody's irreplaceable in your team, you probably aren't a very good manager. But that's easy to say, but you may be a really small company or maybe a very, very special person. And we want to have room for accommodate that. But we need some flexibility. So again, I'm being dogmatic in the senses dogmatic about being not dogmatic. And to talk about this a little bit and put it in perspective, let's talk about one of my passions. So one of my clients and people I work with a lot are Trek, who make Lance Armstrong's bikes as well as mountain bikes. And if I'm sitting in a in a business where, like in a 3D industry, where it's basically fully saturated and there's no growth, and all you can do is at best take a little bit of market share, and that's really expensive. It's not how you want to, again, that's not how you want to get rich and build up your retirement plan. Think about the bicycle industry in the late 1970s. It was in exactly that case. It would be stupid for you to invest in a bicycle company. And you would never build a retail shop for bicycles. You would never do that. It's just stupid because there's mom and dad things. You greasy, fix and change and do that sort of stuff because it was a totally mature industry not going anywhere. And then some yahoos started riding down the hills in Marin County and falling off their bikes, modifying the bikes, and mountain biking was born. And all of a sudden something happened. And it changed the bicycle industry dramatically. So my mantra in meetings when I'm in companies that are in these saturated non-growth product things is to say, what is the mountain bike in our situation? Because there is a mountain bike. The question is, your designers are some of the people who can most help you get there, especially if they're working with clever engineers. So this is the first mountain bike that Trek ever built. And I want you to take a look at it carefully because when you look at this, you will say, how the hell did that start a revolution? Because that is a really boring conventional bike by today's standards was not some great incremental change. But that small evolutionary change is what I'd say is radical evolution. It went down a particular trajectory that brought you into new space. And notice, you didn't have to go all the way down to this head in the skies wild new radical design. It just had to go down a certain trajectory. I can have my head in the clouds and my feet firmly planted in the mud. That's your job as a designer. And the problem is most people only see the head in the clouds and don't notice the feet, how dirty they are. Now, here's where advanced engineering, or let's say research, came in on the mountain bike. This is a full engineering prototype of what became the Y bike from Trek, which was the thing that made that company cool and was the key to that business just taking off and coming from a very small little boutique bicycle firm to something that was huge in bicycle company standards. Now look at it. The key thing here is it's got a soft tail, the rear suspension. Now there's a critical thing you have to know about bicycles is the bicycle's supposed to go forward. The problem is the rider has no way to make it go forward other than to do up-down motion, which causes circular motion that then causes forward motion. Key thing is my weight transfer is mostly up-down, especially if you're a bad bike rider. You should have actually power throughout the whole stroke. But anyhow, we'll just say up-down, especially if you're pumping uphill. If I'm going uphill like this with a soft-tail bike, the bike is going to rock. If the bike is rocking, that energy is being dissipated and up-down as opposed to forward. Bad. Hardtail, rigid bikes are better to stand up and pump on. Coming downhill, however, once you got up the hill, you do not want a rigid tail. So compromise around. So the geometry here is critical. Have a soft tail while minimizing the bounce while you're pumping. It only could be done by a mechanical engineer who knew what they were doing and understood the task as well as the engineering and the physics. Look at this bike. If you put a seat on it, handlebars on it, gears, wheels, and brakes, this bike is 100% functional and in fact was ridden, was tested, and worked. That is to say, this bike could have shipped as is. You could manufacture that exactly as it is and it would work perfectly well. It did work perfectly well. I've spoken to the guys who designed it. If it shipped like that, it would be pretty much how we ship most of our software. This was done by an engineer. It would have worked, it could have shipped, it could have been supported, and it would have failed. Now, up until that point, bicycle design was a boutique industry. It was a craft, handcraft. Everybody knew what a bike looked like, they knew how to do it, and the only design was the color of the graphics on it. They knew they had something different, so they hired a guy, Matt Gorbin, from Art Center in Pasadena, straight out of school, never designed anything in a product in his life before. Locked him up for 3 months with the 2 engineers who worked on that, and this is what he came out with. And this changed everything. Now, trust me, somebody who went to MIT did not design that. Somebody who went to Carnegie Mellon or an engineering school did not do the design there, but they sure as hell did the engineering. This could not happen without the right group, the team, the collaboration. And the innovation What this brought in terms of sensibility and design is what we need to have in all of our products. Now, there's one other aspect about this. This is really interesting because Trek and all other bicycles knew what their business was. To basically do the frames, do the design, and then contract out to others for the components, like Shimano for the gears, the brakes, the wheels, the pedals, the seats. All that stuff came from outside, the tires. That was, and the shock absorbers. That was all out of their purview. They didn't do that. They just got that in from suppliers. Specialized is one of Trek's main competitors. What they did is said they innovated on their business model, not on their technology. On their business model, they said, well, what about this bouncing problem? Trek's got it pretty good, but there's still some bounce. Can we fix that? Now, what they did is they went and they looked at some patents. And then patents in around 1947, there's some patents, critical patents, something called inertial shocks. An inertial shock absorber is a shock absorber that when it's still is rigid, therefore it's not a shock absorber. It's just a rigid body that weighs a little bit more than most and costs more than a piece of pipe. But when it's moving, the valves open and the fluids can flow, and it is a shock absorber. So they took that, internally at Specialized, the bicycle company, they developed that into a form that could work with a bicycle. They patented that to protect that. Then that's as far as they took it, because they knew they did not have the core competence in manufacturing shock absorbers. They then partnered with Fox, which was one of the main shock absorbers manufacturers. They then took that, finished off that shock, built it, made their own patents, which then locked in Specialized to use Fox to build their shocks. And then they brought up this bike which had a proprietary inertial valve shock absorber in the back. Now, this battle goes back and forth in innovation, so that, I'm not going to stop there, but I just want to point out, the innovation here cuts across every part of the company you see. The business model, how you conceive, what are you as a company, what's your core competence. By the way, do you notice a similarity between what I just said about what they did here by going outside of what was apparently their core competence to get their innovation as what Adobe did when they went to Photoshop, when they moved away from just saying, hey, we're not about PostScript, we're about images. And they stayed within their business and their market. They just changed how they framed their identity. The innovation has to cut across all this. And one of the things you'll notice that I left out, that especially here, so you didn't even yell at me yet, is that, of course, it's not just engineering, design, and sales. Of course, research belongs up there as well, and advanced development. And it's clear here that you feed the funnel, the design funnel, from all of these places. There are no bad ideas. Remember what I said. At the front of that funnel, it's easy in, easy out. Anybody can throw stuff in here. And we have to know how to filter that volume of stuff that comes. Right now, in too many companies, there's nowhere to go when you have a good idea. And you have to change the spelling of that. It's K-N-O-W, where to go. And every company, you have to know where to go with the ideas, as opposed to know where to go. And the underline of all this is iteration, sketching, prototyping, research. So I'm not going to talk about how we go through the funnel very much because, I'm trying to write a book about it. I'll give you an essay about it. You're welcome to read the draft. I just want to make a few things here to say that what I do feel really strongly about is the thing of language. This is the same graph we've seen in a slightly different version earlier. It shows the iteration through the design phase. But I want to say that we're talking about designing experience here. The thing about Trek and these other companies, they don't design bicycles. Anybody who thinks they do should be fired. They design experience. And the bicycle is a vehicle to deliver that experience. And we could even step back a little bit and sort of say design interaction. Well, whether you call it interaction or you call it experience or both, the point is, how do you sketch those things? We can't agree among ourselves what design is, so it's a waste of time to have that conversation unless you're buying the beer. But we can agree that design, as we're talking about it, we can describe it by its archetypal activity, which is sketching. If sketching is the archetypal activity for design as I want to talk about design, and we're talking about designing experiences and interactive and dynamic things, and if that is design, then there must be sketching. It must also be the archetypal activity for that. So what is sketching in the context of design of these dynamic things that we make in terms of our products? And the key thing here is I want to say that there is something here called sketching which is different than prototyping. Prototypes take a higher investment, they're higher fidelity, they serve different purposes. They're to show, to explain, to convince. These are to explore, to ask, to question. These are cheap, lots of them, easy to make, disposable. They let me explore things early, fail early, fail often, and probably no code at all. Yeah?
So I know a little bit about where to go looking for an industrial designer coming out of school. Where do I go find somebody who is a designer in this context, software industry?
That's a harder question because it's a really tough thing because what do you want? The question is, so we know where to go to get an industrial designer, but where do we go to get an interaction or an experience designer? And the problem is the schools themselves don't know that, and they're trying to figure that out. And that's precisely what I'm writing my book about. And so in one sense, I can give you a long answer, and I'll just go to www.billbuxton.com. The hidden site is just athabasca.pdf. Just Mount Athabasca, Athabasca Lake, or Athabasca River. It's, you'll find my thoughts on that there. We're running out of time, but it's a critical point. And if you're a manager, who should you hire? If you're a teacher, what should you be teaching? Those are the problems we have. So quick tale about the difference between interface design and experience design. So some personal anecdotes. Two things keep me going besides ideas. Coffee and orange juice. I can't live without fresh squeezed orange juice in the morning. I'm holding out this week, but I'm actually seriously thinking about bringing that stuff with me from now on. Now, I used to have this juicer. Slice the orange juice, put it on, motor goes back and forth, grinds the orange juice. I loved it. I have a house in the country. I needed to wake up there too, so I got a different orange juicer. So with my wife, Museum of Modern Art in New York, the shop across the street, nice, beautiful designed orange juice squeezer. This one's manual. It went to the cabin. I loved it. Now the reason I loved it was it's quiet. You just slice, bam, pull, and it's great. And by the way, these things that use compression make better orange juice because they don't crush the pits, which makes it bitter. And you don't wake up your guests, or your wife, or your kids, or the dogs. I whined and I whined and I whined. Finally, my wife got sick and tired of me saying, I hate this thing, which I used to love, because this is so much better. The experience is better. By the way, I knew how to use both. It wasn't a usability issue. They both worked perfectly well. Neither of them ever failed. I just hated that one in comparison to the experience of the second. So my wife, bless her heart, bought me another manual one. This is the Orange X, Orange, capital X, juicer. You are going to get one. It's coming to you Christmas. You want to make your spouse, children, parents love you forever. Trust me, this is your product. All right? Now, here's the point. You can't tell this from that. When I look at the photographs, I took those photographs. I still have trouble. I confuse the two. But let's guess what happened. Liz bought me that. I gave that to our daughter. And immediately, I started to whine even louder. And the reason I whined even louder is that this was so much better than that. I hated that. Because this has a rack and pinion gear. It's a direct drive. The mice people here, Steve, it's a 1-to-1 CD ratio, right? And the further you get down to the power stroke, you get the last bit of juice, you have to push the hardest. Guess what? I hate doing that first thing in the morning. I haven't had my coffee yet. The other one, and I put this up as a sketch of dynamics. How do you sketch stuff? The other one has a camming action. So when you pull here, the axis is there, and then it pulls down the lid. So it's basically the user interface is the same, but it's a completely different mechanism. And here's the point about it. When you pull down, as you get further down the stroke, it gets easier and easier. It's like a cadence. It's like it's beautiful. You go pull, and it's, oh. It's just like, oh. And it's every time you do it, every morning, you just have this like, oh. And then you follow up with, oh. And it's just fantastic. And the observation is that the user interface from these two manual ones is exactly the same. They are both equally usable. It has nothing to do about usability. And the interface, the documentation, everything is interchangeable. They're the same. But from the question of experience, that manual juicer, the first one, is as different from the second manual juicer is as different from the first one as the first manual was from the electronic one. They bear no relationship to each other. There is no comparison. And damn it, we have to get to the point where that's what we deliver in every software product we put out there. You pick it up, and you just go, like, oh, right? And we've got to do that. Now, here's the thing that's going on. So, I gave an earlier version of this talk at a usability conference. Got yelled at a lot, because I said they weren't designers. And what happened was, but on the hand, generally, I know sometimes I give good talks. So it's, oh, gee, yay, yay. And then next day, it's sort of like, oh, Bill, that was a nice talk. It was so neat. Thanks. You were really excited. And they said, you're really lucky. That's not my normal feedback I get from talks. You're really lucky. So, well, yeah, I am lucky. But what was it about my talk that made you think I was lucky? And I said, well, you get to think about all this long-term stuff and all this great ideas and stuff like that, but I actually have to ship product in every 6 months and stuff like that, and I've got to work way down in the trenches, so I don't get to think about things like that you do. And here's what happened to me when that happened. He didn't realize this, but basically what he says, your talk was superficial entertainment, and it was totally useless. It didn't contribute one iota of information that helps me on my day-to-day job, and you just wasted my time. My company spent a bunch of money sending me this conference, and you didn't give them anything. You just entertained me. A movie would have been way cheaper. You suck. As he's patting me on the back smiling and telling me how lucky I am that I suck. So, to him I devote the following thing. Here's another list of companies. IBM, Macromedia, Alias, Adobe, Adobe. And some products beside it. 1, 2, 3, Director, Studio, and so on. Now here's what I want to do. Take that same list. They're in chronological order. The ones at the top are the oldest. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a point in time here, which is today, 2004. And along through that, I'm going to insect a mirror. Now what I'm going to do is put the launch date of the newest product in this list here, which is 1998, and direct the beam of that date to the mirror and bounce it into the future. Takes us to 2010. Then I'm going to come and go to 1990, when Photoshop was released, and bounce that in the future, 2018, 1987, 2021, 1985, 2023, and Lotus, bless its heart, come along. It's old, so it moves slowly. 2026. So here's the thing. If you make a new product, what's the worst thing that can happen? It fails miserably. What's the second worst thing that can happen? It succeeds phenomenally. It's the second worst thing that could happen to you if you don't design it. Because what you design today, today's success, is tomorrow's legacy code. It is what ties the hands, the feet, and the mouth, and the pocketbooks of your successors and your company, and probably your pension plan. Yeah?
Is anybody using 1, 2, 3 anymore?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the point here I want to make is that if you're not designing a product today that's going to be valid in the computational and social and economic ecology of 10 years from now, you shouldn't be in your job. And if you work in a place where you're not allowed to consider that, your management shouldn't be in their job. Because we have to design for success. Now, that doesn't mean, and this is why I had the mountain bike, it doesn't mean my first mountain bike was the Y bike. But I had to anticipate the potential of the Y bike. My first product can be as conservative as what I showed you. I can have my feet in the ground, but damn it, my head has to be. It's my job to have my head in the sky because I understand a couple things. That Moore's law is not a myth. I know that network's going to it's going to double the rate of Moore's law. I know that the display real estate is going to be almost free. I know a lot of things. And if I don't take those into account and make best efforts to anticipate those things and make sure my design decisions will accommodate and grow and evolve into that seamlessly or as effortless as possible, I don't have to get it right. I just have to be responsible and make best effort and have a best practice in doing so and on budget and meet my deadlines and obligations in the other dimensions as well. And the way I think about this, yet another movie metaphor, is the river runs through it. And a river runs through it, right? It's fly fishing. I think the fish are over there. That's where the ecology of the future is. I will cast my line there. And then I'm going to wind in. And when I wind in, I haven't given up on the fish being over there. But that fishing line cuts a trajectory through the water that comes out at my feet, and that's today. Any decision I'm making has to take that line and that point into consideration. I may be able to make double the revenue to my right as at my feet, but either I should take the lower revenue that's by that line or tell me why I shouldn't change where I think the fish are. But I have to take that longer term view, and that's strategic. And I can't change that every day. If I'm changing where I think the fish are every day of the week, then get rid of your management. Which is, the one way to do that is you just go to a different company. But the point is we have to do this. And it has to pervade the entire culture of the company to really feature in terms of innovation. So a couple thoughts and relevance in the marketplace we see right now. So let's look at Apple. That was brought up earlier. There's no question about the fact that design saved Apple. 2 days after Steve Jobs returned to Apple, he held a press conference, a press briefing, and with actually an analyst's briefing, where he said, when they asked him, what are you going to do to save the company, he said, I'm going to invest in design. That's the good news. It worked. There's been these number of generations, the first, the semi-transparent candy-colored Macs, then the Luxo lamp Mac, and then the iPod Mac. I mean, think about it for a minute. Here I have a company that's been making computers since the 70s, and the new G5, the tagline is, from the company that brought you the iPod. How weird is that? But notice, the industrial design on the iMacs was completely separate, other than from one inflection point of management, from the design of the software. That is to say, the design of what was in front of the glass was completely separate from the people who designed what was behind the glass. Now what's interesting is, even though they were separated, the superficial exterior coating was able to save the company. Now you might ask, what if you had actually designed the whole thing through design? So the behaviors as well as the things around the behaviors, that delivered the behaviors, were coherent design. Don't know. Hardly anyone's done it, at least in the computer industry. But the key thing is, with ubiquitous computing, you're not going to be able to do that anymore. The iMac is the last time anybody's going to be able to save any company by doing superficial exterior industrial design. I hope. The design, as we get to these information appliances, the design of the hardware and the software must be integrated in a coherent way. And things like the iPod, cell phones, and other things are convincing that. But the reason I think it's really interesting here is, again, in keeping with the mountain bike story, it's not just the software and the hardware of the product, but the business model and the general ecology around it that has to be designed and designed correctly. Design is as much about process and business process as it is about the products themselves. And the various cultures that have expertise to make this happen need to work together and understand that I am no more a business strategy genius than they are a designer of products or interaction. And that overall ecology is limited by its weakest link. You can have everything right except one thing and you will fail. It's an ecological cultural issue that we have to foster. And it's relevant throughout. Dell has, and others, I mean, Acer has larger market share in the PC market than Apple does right now. But if you wanted to take out Dell, all you needed to do was match their innovation and process with something that had decent design. If something of the quality of the G5 iMac was being sold and manufactured by the business process of Dell, Dell would be out of business really fast, unless they countered, like Specialized did. And design's essential. It's just not sufficient. It has to be there. So we can talk about some case studies, but we're running out of time, and maybe it's better to have. But I do want to show one quick thing. Because you could say, well, Bill, what have you done that would convince us that this isn't just a bunch of rhetoric by somebody who's an airhead who hasn't done product? Well, I have done some products. And there's one that many of you actually have some experience with. And that's this product called Alias Sketchbook. Now, I quit Alias in December of 2001. And before that was announced, they convinced me to stay. And I quit because I was so frustrated at what was going on in terms of product development, exactly these issues. But they convinced me to stay and said, here, we'll change, we'll change, we'll change. So stay for 3 months and give us a chance. So I stayed for 3 months. I actually took 6 months. And finally said, OK, we'll give you this. Tell us this. So I started doing this sort of outline about this design process. And sort of said, OK, well, here's how I want to do it. So on July 1st, 2002, I was given a green light to put together a small group and try and develop a product. No specification of the product, just do a product that's consistent with our market base, our market, and what our users need. And here's how big of a team you can have, which is in the order of 8 to 10 people overall. And you've got 90 days till you must come to the green light process. And here is the explicit evaluation matrix for the green light. And the main feature of that, aside from what I told you, was that the product has to have the potential to do 100,000 units within 3 years. That was it. The long and the short story was, that was July 1st. I had no team. By the end of a week, I had the design group together. We'd met. We'd gone through over a dozen ideas, and we'd nailed 1 or 2. The bottom line is, we were shipping product with reviews in every PC magazine, all 4 or 5-star reviews, on November 7th of that same year, in 5 months. We were on stage with Bill Gates at the November 7th launch in New York City of the tablet PC. We worked with Bert Keeley and the team. We had no tablet PC. I'd worked with the team before, so I knew about it. We had some core competence in paint, and the product we did was Alias Sketchbook. In the process of doing that, we built prototypes. We went through the green light process 60 days after the team was formed. And that was September, the first week of September. On the first week of October, Microsoft insisted we were not allowed to go on the press tour, so we had to deliver a CD-ROM plus a documentation that they could hand, without any hand-holding, to the reviewers of PC World and stuff like that to do the reviews. We met that deadline. We got the top reviews of any product. As recently, and that was 2007 when it was, 2002 when the product was launched, November. As recently as 2 months ago on Business Week, when they were talking about the problems of the tablet PC, Business Week said there's only 2 products that have understood, external from Microsoft, 2 products have understood the potential and idiom of the tablet PC, and this product was one of them. Now, that's an existence proof that it can be done. It doesn't prove that following the process is what made that happen in that short time. I had the right people and the right motivation. But on the other hand, that existence proof doesn't say that the process works. But what I do know is all the other processes we had tried had ended in abject failure, and they had no successes. We hit it out of the park on the first try. So I just want to show you. Oh, and then process, we also filed 3 patents. They were filed before the product shipped in the same time. We built some prototypes, which I will show you, and furthermore, those inventions appeared in the product in a limited form. We got them in, and in order to do so, they had to go through exactly the same rigorous usability testing that anything else in that product went. And I've never seen the product crash, and that's just not an issue. So just quickly. I may need you, Stephen.
Let me know.
Yeah, do you want to come and just get this going quickly, and then so I've got my the main thing is get the yeah. So while yeah, it's plugged in. Yeah, okay. So I want to show you a couple things in invention, because there's some stuff here that I think is it's interesting to you as well. Yeah, great, thanks. my swag from the product launch. So here's the, we also want to do PC1 goes on to there. Is that this guy? Okay, for PC2. Yes. It's locked. Okay, here we go. So the first thing I want to show you is the idea that's in the product. Come along. So the interesting thing is that I hate scroll bars. So this is, think about a Mason's jar that you do preserves on, a piece of glass. This is called a tracking menu. Now, it's hard for you to see, but the menu, this semi-transparent menu that's going around the screen is my tracking symbol. When I move my stylus and I hit the border of that menu, it's dragging and following. You can see my cursor. When my cursor's over top of the menu, it highlights the current selection. So this is zoom. So if I push down, I can zoom in and out. I can zoom by steps up and down by clicking here. And if I click on the pan thing, I can pan the screen. And if I want to zoom in to that location, I can lock it. And then, in principle, come over to the right with my paintbrush, work on that part of the image, then just, and you notice the menu disappears while I'm painting because it's illegal to select from. Then I can come back in and zoom back out again or whatever. So the point is, with one hand, I don't have to keep going up to the menu bar, down. My work comes to me. It's as if I had it in my left hand, but since I'm holding the tablet in my left hand, I can do it all with the stylus. Now you could say, so why is that interesting, or why do I care? Because I want to show you a different manifestation of this that solves, I think, one of the fundamental problems of the tablet PC, and that is you've got all these legacy applications that are three-button mouse problem, but you only have the tip. I think we should remove the great. Your secrets are not safe. You better be nice to me or I'm going to click on these things and really embarrass you in public. So I don't even like the button on the side of this. I think we should get rid of the buttons that are there as opposed to add more, but I still want to do 3 buttons. Notice, in this case, the tracking menu is an icon of a mouse with an explicit cursor. So I want to go up to an icon. I do that, but notice when I move over top, you can barely see it on the screen, but I don't want to see it. I just use my pen tip as the feedback. When I put my pen tip over the left mouse button, I select that thing and I can drag it. But if I move over to the menu item on the right, which is drawn, the menu item just happens to be a picture of the right mouse button and click, except he's got this goofy pause thing. I hate that, right? This is way better. And now I can do the right mouse button. And if I come over here because I've killed that and let's say drag this puppy and then go over the middle, I get this strange behavior, but I just want to show that I can distinguish the 3 mouse buttons. And then if I come to the bottom, there's this other magic area where I have these marking menus. So I can get the shift or any functions here. So I can get really fast access. The point is, without changing one line in the application code, without changing any of the operating system, simply by inserting this little module, you can access all the functions with a finger on a touch screen or with a stylus through a simple fix that can track and just work and maintains. And this is part of and this was the invention. And both these prototypes I showed you were done during that 5-month period and led to the stuff in the patent filings and so on and so forth. And that's, I'm just trying to say that, and by the way, these are my research group. That the head of my research group took on the lead engineer's job on this, and George Fitzmaurice, he was the lead in terms of this basic idea. And then you have this drawing program that just lets you do things. You notice that we use marking menus here that lets you come here. The icons are, the color palette is in a circle, so it prompts you what's there before you make the motion. But if I want black, I go up. If I want red, I go right. But now I can just go black, red. And I can do the same thing with my brushes. That's my airbrush. And the brushes are fast and so on and so forth. And so on a black airbrush, we can go that way. And yes, lo and behold, I can go up here. And, oh, this is the older version. This is the really early version. This one doesn't have the tracking. This isn't the shipping version. So it's there. But since we're here, let's just go to somewhere else on your computer. There. And we'll come down to, is it? It's not loaded. Okay, so I didn't check the version. So there's two other parts about this program that are important. It's not just a sketching program. You can bring any document and draw on top of it as a ground. Then it becomes an annotation program. Key thing is this. The whole thing was about flow. I wanted that experience of at the end of the stroke of the orange juice squeezer. Here's the specification. I think I mentioned the portfolio wall the other day. The specification portfolio wall was in usability or user experience perspectives. Any employee of General Motors could learn 80% of the functionality in 3 to 5 minutes with a 90% retention a week later, or it's a stop ship bug, even if every line of code works. In this one, it was this. I can be in any program, in any state on my tablet PC, and within 15 seconds, I can get a screen snap of what I'm working on, annotate it within Sketchbook, have mailed it to anybody I wanted, and be back working in the original application within 15 seconds, plus the time it took me to do the annotation. Because at the bottom, there's a little camera, and when you click on that, within 3 seconds, you are inside of Sketchbook with the pen loaded, with that screen snap where you can draw, and then with one marking menu, you can send it off to either a file system or to a mail program, and then be right back into your application. It's about flow. It's about design. And it's not about making yet another dumb paint program. It's about how does this fit in the context. All of that in 5 months. No team to shipping with the press and everything around it. And so I'm not saying, you could sort of say, well, what's a researcher doing shipping product? I care about design, I care about process. How can I do research on the process of design if I haven't done the act? I'm hands-on. It's a mixture. And at the point was, it also gave me a vehicle to prove to all of these engineers that have been telling me all my life that why you can't put these new features in because they're too risky, to prove by example, yes, you can. If we trust each other and we work together, we can increase the speed and rate of innovation. So the final comment I want to make is there's two kinds of innovation. The first kind is what I call accelerated evolution. Somehow you have discontinuity in the predictable evolutionary path and you gain short-term competitive advantage. But you actually are winning the arms race for a while. The other kind is what I call surprising obviousness. And surprising obviousness has the following characteristics. You've never seen this in your life before, but when you see it for the first time, you instantly recognize it for what it is and what it can do. And you say, that's exactly what I needed. How did you do that? That's great. Then you say, wow, that's obvious. I could have done that. And then say, why didn't I do that? And that's, by the way, if you're a consultant, get paid before we get to this point, because the next stage is, well, actually, I did do that. I thought about that in 75, right? I just didn't call it that. And then it's like, well, that's just obvious, so I'm not going to pay you. It's not worth much. And the point I'm trying to make here is that is where the real innovation comes. If we follow these processes, aside from saying, what's the mountain bike, the other mantra that we have to adopt in every design meeting, product meeting is this. What gives us the arrogance to believe that our competitors aren't having exactly the same meeting we're having because they have access, they went to the same schools, they have the same training, they have the same marketing reports, they read the same papers. So why are we so arrogant to believe they're not having the same meeting? And you've got to answer that. And my sense is because we've got the right process and we're looking at it differently because they're going after the predictable evolution, we're going after the mountain bike and the surprising obviousness. Thank you very much. Thanks. So I'm happy. I know I was late, but if you do want to ask questions, I'm happy to take them.
I'm Mark Kingley. We exchanged a little mail
Yeah,
and missed
hi.
one another. I really